Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Driven by Cause. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Arriva and Microsoft. I'm joined by our awesome co-host, Jay Fisk. How are you doing today, Jay?
I am doing great, David, and I'm looking forward to another great Driven by Cause session with a wonderful guest.
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be here today, and I'm really privileged to introduce our fabulous guest, Dr. Una Osili. Una is the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. With experience in leadership, economic policies, research, Dr. Osili has come to lead the research and publications of the Global Philanthropic Environment Index, the Global Philanthropy Tracker, and the annual Giving USA report. She's an internationally recognized expert on philanthropy, economics, and international development. Dr. Osili recently testified before the Joint Economic Committee of the United States Congress on supporting charitable giving during the COVID-19 crisis. She is frequently quoted by international and national news media outlets such as NPR, the New York Times, Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Chronicle of Philanthropy. The nonprofit Times named her to its list of the 50 most influential people in the nonprofit sector in 2019, 20, and 21. Thank you for being here today, Una.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be with you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so do we. And it's really great to have you. And let's go ahead and get started. Una, we love getting started, and we love if you can share with our listeners some information about yourself, so they can get to know you and how you started in the nonprofit industry. I mean, it's always exciting to hear those things.
Well, thank you for that question. I was born in New York City, and I grew up in Nigeria. I have one Nigerian parent, my father, and my mother is from New York, from Long Island, and came back to the United States for school. And one thing that I think has been a common denominator, a through line in both my childhood, my young adulthood, and now as an adult, is a commitment to generosity and to helping others and to being invested in the communities where I live in. And my parents were very active in their own communities. Both parents are college professors, but they took an interest in exposing us, even at a very young age, to volunteering opportunities. And so even as a young person, 5, 6 years old, we started volunteering and continued that. As a college student, I went to school in the Boston area. I was very involved in Phillips Brooks House Association, after school tutoring programs in Boston. And during the summers, I actually worked as a camp counselor and then as the associate director of a summer youth program in Mission Hill in Roxbury in the 1990s. These were very challenging neighborhoods. And I learned firsthand the importance of philanthropy, of course, fundraising, writing grants, phonathons, but also working with communities, collaborating with parents, the Tenants Association, local businesses, to really think about how could this summer program be structured so it meets the needs of the community. Fast forward the tape to undergraduate. I studied economics, and in graduate school, I became very interested in the study of generosity. Today, of course, we have a wealth of data sources that provide information on how much Americans give and people around the world give. But back in the 1990s, there wasn't a lot of information on these topics. And I think that piqued my curiosity in, of course, understanding the sector, but also wanting to help build the knowledge gap so that leaders in the nonprofit sector, policymakers, and practitioners would have this data and these data sources at their fingertips. So I'm so pleased that in the years that I have been involved in philanthropy, we've seen such an expansion in generosity in the different ways that people are giving with technology. And the fortunate thing is that here at the Lilly Family School, I'm a faculty member, but also Associate Dean for Research. We've been able to come alongside a lot of these big macro trends that are shaping the field and provide actionable data and insights. So it's really fun, and it's a blessing to be able to bring your passion with your everyday role at work and kind of merge the two. And I feel fortunate to be able to do both.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I tell you, Dr. Osili, in your role as the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, I understand you led the research and you lead the research and publication of Giving USA, the annual report on American philanthropy. Can you share with us some of the impressive findings your team have uncovered that you share in the 2023 report?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that because Giving USA is literally the longest running annual report on charitable giving anywhere in the world. And people all over the country, but also the world, wait for these results every year. And our team works around the clock, starting once we release 1 year's report to the next year, we start work on the report. In the 2023 report, those results were eagerly anticipated because as a collective, we had been through a global pandemic, a racial and social justice movement, ongoing economic uncertainty. So first, I'll share the highlights. Giving is still a very impressive part of the U.S. economy, nearly $500 billion, about 2% of GDP is given every year. And 2023, Giving USA showed how vast the sector is. We also saw that some of the economic pressures, including high inflation and uncertainty, had a dampening effect on giving. So during the pandemic, giving grew, but we saw a slight contraction in giving in the 2023 report as a result of the inflationary pressures and some of the stock market volatility that we saw in 2022. So looking ahead, I think that the question is, what do we expect in the upcoming year? And Giving USA will stay tuned. The results will be available in June 2024. And one of the points that I think we've been able to highlight is that Americans are very generous. The data demonstrate that. We've seen giving grow even during a very difficult time in our country and in the world, but that economic factors can influence how much people give and also the kinds of causes they support.
Your thoughts?
Una, you already sort of answered a few of these questions, which is really awesome. But you're right. On average, individual giving as a share of disposable income, as we call it, has been about 2% for 40 years. And what we're seeing now in 2022, that it's dipped about to 1.7%. Additionally, giving by individuals declined by, I believe, 6.4% in 2022 compared to 2021. And I know there's a lot of factors, you mentioned a few, but do you believe why is there such a decline like this? And it's two parts to this question. And additionally, for the nonprofits listening now, do you have any insights or strategies on successful practices to help retain or engage donors today?
Absolutely. You raised a lot of different points. One, we've seen individuals, I guess the share of disposable income that goes to charitable giving has stayed relatively stable at about 2% and even declined slightly. That is something we have been paying attention to at the Lilly Family School. The question is, what would it take to have Americans allocate more of their disposable income to charitable causes? I think the first part of that is to say that we need nonprofits, of course, need to continue to demonstrate to individuals why the causes that they are raising funds for are worthwhile and build authentic and engaged relationships with those individual donors. I also think that there is a role for public policy. In this time period, we've seen some of the incentives, the recognition that individuals receive in the tax code kind of be rolled back. And there's an opportunity for policy to address some of these issues. And then finally, I think at this same time, we've seen Americans allocate more of their dollars to technology, to other categories, certainly food, housing. And so the question is, what would we have to do differently as a sector to boost the amount of resources that are allocated to charity? Alongside that, how can we make it easier to give? Today, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, and something I am quite interested in is how do we make it frictionless for someone to give to a cause? Because often it takes many different steps. Many charities are not necessarily optimized to make it easy to give. And I think increasingly in this era where many people are making donations using technology, we have an opportunity to really produce, I think, the kinds of tools that can activate donors and make it really seamless for them to support the causes that matter to them.
And you mentioned, of course, that as a society, we are very generous. And in fact, your 2023 Giving USA report identified that about 64%, 63.9% of the contributions in the U.S. come from individuals, totaling about $319 billion, with mega donors representing about 5% of individual giving at 13.96, about $14 billion, which is an increase from 2021. Can you speak more about this data and discuss where there may be an increase in contributions and why there may be an increase in contributions from major donors?
Wonderful point to elevate. So yes, Americans are very generous. And we've also seen that in this time period, you could describe it as the rise of the mega donor. We saw Mackenzie Scott in 2020 alone, one single individual gave $6 billion. And it's been quite inspiring to see the kinds of large gifts that have been made during this era. And what's also interesting, although we don't have time to go into that, is how those gifts were made. Many of them were unrestricted gifts without any kind of strings attached. So a lot to take away from how mega donors are changing the landscape and also the different ways that they're giving. But if you take a bigger picture view of what's taking place, one way to simplify is to say that we are living in an era where we have fewer donors, but dollars are continuing to rise. We call this trend. Donors are down, but dollars are up. And a lot of that is because high net worth donors have continued to make contributions. Many of them have even stepped up their giving in the wake of the pandemic and some of the challenges that we've discussed. And so at the very same time, for everyday donors, we've seen declines in participation rates. And so fewer people are giving, but among those that are giving, we're seeing larger gifts being made. There is both an opportunity for nonprofits to build relationships with donors so that they can engage everyday donors as well as the mega donors. Because historically, I think it's important to note that we've had American philanthropy has been very broad-based. People of all different backgrounds, income backgrounds, race and ethnic backgrounds have participated in giving. And as we look at inequality and also as we noted some of the economic pressures that families are facing, that has been responsible for some of the trends and also the fact that we have lower levels of trust in institutions.
I want to talk to you just for a minute about social media and its impact on giving. In your 2023 Giving USA report, social media is shown to have accounted for $6 billion in giving. And what do you account for this, and how can nonprofits integrate and capitalize perhaps better off this growing medium? So $6 billion to me, relative to $319 billion, seems like a fairly small percentage. Seems like there's a lot of some room for growth there in the social media side. So how can the nonprofits capitalize off that?
It's a great insight. Over the pandemic, we saw an inflection in the use of technology across our society in so many different areas, but also a rise in giving via social media and also crowdfunding. A recent report released in 2021 by the Lilly Family School showed that about 40% of Americans had either given via crowdfunding or via social media. That's a very large number. And if we look at this number in perspective, maybe in 2016, that was only 15 or 16%. So there is a tremendous opportunity for nonprofits to start to think about how they can leverage social media as well as crowdfunding. As an example, during the pandemic, one very well-known organization, the CDC Foundation, launched a crowdfunding campaign. They had no individual donors before COVID, and they raised $40 million in just 1 month. So what we found is that social media allows nonprofits to reach a whole new audience. Sometimes it's younger donors, sometimes it's more diverse donors. And people are also going to social media to learn about the causes that they should support. When we look at how people learn about nonprofits, charitable organizations, they're often looking at their friends, their networks to say, where should I give? And if there is a cause that they care about, but they don't necessarily know where to start, they're leaning in to their friends. And so social media has a role to play. I still think, of course, that online fundraising is still quite small compared to other forms, but it has the potential to grow. And I think an important, often overlooked point is that people are going to social media to actually learn about nonprofits, about causes, about areas of support.
Yeah, Una, I could talk on that subject with you for, I think, quite a while. And like you mentioned earlier about technology, how technology can actually help them with engagement and acquisition and retention, and maybe going beyond just a crowd fundraising, because they're not going to get all of the information. They're only getting the money, which there's a nice movement now into that whole dedicated peer-to-peer fundraising where it's tied directly to the organization. And I love that you're saying this stuff. And I think there's such a great movement on that. But despite the overall decline that we're hearing in giving, it is interesting that religious organizations reported a 5% increase in donations. Giving to foundations grew by 10%. The numbers are big, totaling about $56.8 billion. And health organizations, international affairs nonprofits, arts and culture, humanities organizations all saw an increase in giving. What does this tell you about giving trends in the USA today?
Yes, I think it's important to note that there isn't one size fits all anymore, that despite the overall trends, there are specific areas in philanthropy that are doing quite well. We also saw that many organizations were rebounding after being hard hit during the pandemic. I'll mention a few of those. So arts and culture organizations, a lot of performing arts organizations, museums, and so forth had to pull back a lot of their in-person fundraising during the pandemic. And in the past few years, they've been able to restart some of those, maybe sometimes doing both virtual and in-person, but starting to interact with donors, potential donors, and their communities at large. And those organizations have seen a boost. It's also interesting, a lot of our large health organizations, the American Cancer Society, Heart Association, and so forth, they also had to pivot during the pandemic because many of their fundraisers were geared towards in-person. So I think another lesson from the Giving USA data this year is that resilience and innovation are really two key principles in this fast-changing landscape. And we saw that nonprofits that were able to adapt to the changing needs of donors and also align with whether it was providing fundraising opportunities online or in person, or sometimes doing both, were the ones that were most successful. So regardless of the subsectors, there's also a theme that innovation is really going to be important going forward, because there are new ways of giving, new ways of engaging with donors, and organizations that are able to adapt in real time to those changes are the ones that are going to see the most success.
Wow, thank you.
Sticking with your 2023 report, it was found there was an increase in giving to international causes, international affairs. Do you believe this is indicative of the current political climate and global issues facing the world today, or perhaps there's some other reason why people are going outside the border, so to speak, with their donations?
Yes, well, in 2022 in particular, and we've seen this trend continue, there have been many international disasters, conflicts, and humanitarian opportunities to support. One that I'll single out is the war in Ukraine. It's still going on. It hasn't abated. But in the beginning, a lot of Americans wanted to help. They saw an opportunity to support communities in dealing with the humanitarian crisis. And some donated money. Others even tried to give, you may recall, booked Airbnbs in Ukraine, even if they weren't going to use them, to get cash directly in the hands of families that needed them. So I think some of what we're seeing is that there is many donors want to make a difference. They want to give where their dollars can actually have an impact. And international crises, especially for many younger Americans, allow you to give your funds in a way that can actually move the needle on an issue.
Let's talk about the future just a little bit. Being at the forefront of collecting and analyzing all this data, what do you see as the future for the nonprofit industry? And additionally, what are some of the biggest challenges you see organizations facing today, and should they be concerned for the overall decline in giving? Do you see that on the horizon?
In terms of what we see in looking ahead, I'd say this is a very exciting time to be in philanthropy. Why? Because we see so many new ways of giving. Technology has enabled that. And with artificial intelligence, social media, crowdfunding, there is an opportunity to do things at scale. So we've always had some of these opportunities to help others, perhaps at close to home or far away from us. But with technology, we can literally give in a way that makes a difference in real time. So I think that's really exciting. At no other time in history, you could say, have we had the wealth of tools, the information at our fingertips, and the range of organizations and vehicles that are working within philanthropy. At the very same time, we face a number of threats as a sector, but even as a global community. And I think one of the biggest challenges, I had to pick out one, is trust. The fact that trust in institutions has declined over time, especially for our youngest Americans. Many of them don't have the same level of trust in the nonprofit sector. I think that's something we cannot ignore. Organizations, nonprofit leaders have to work in a way that's transparent and accountable, but we also have to do a better job sharing how our organizations are making a difference. One data point that I think I am still trying to fully understand and grasp is that last year we released a study called What Americans Think About Philanthropy. And it shows that in general, Americans trust nonprofits more than other institutions. They also have a very favorable view of philanthropy and nonprofits. However, when you ask, how have you been helped, or someone in your family, only 5% of Americans say that I have been helped by a nonprofit. So that's quite surprising, given that nonprofits work in arts and culture, in health, in education, in the environment. And we've seen increasingly nonprofits taking on some of the biggest challenges we face as a global community. But I don't think most people truly understand what those organizations do every day and how their dollars can really make a difference.
Wow, you share a lot of wonderful information, and it's and I love your positive attitude about this is a good time to be in philanthropy and nonprofits. It's refreshing. I just want to share that with you, and I appreciate that you share that with our audience. Another wonderful thing is you're the founder of Generosity for Life. Can you share more about this project? I know our audience would love to hear about it, and how our listeners who may be working in the nonprofit industry utilize this tool.
Well, I'm so glad you raised Generosity for Life, because this was born out of the fact that we have a treasure trove of data here at the Lilly Family School. We were really thinking about how do we make this data accessible, and how do we provide it to families, to educators, to nonprofit leaders who can use it. And what we found in that journey is that while there are a lot of stories about how to be generous or how you can increase your own giving, these insights didn't actually have data attached to them. So we set out to create this visual website where you could, of course, get the data, but also have access to some tools that would tell you how your own generosity compared to your neighbors, for example. And there's a giving tool there called the Giveometer, where you can put in your information and tells you what percentile you are in terms of American donors, which we thought would be very interesting because you can do that in so many other realms, whether it's saving for retirement or tracking your educational goals. And we wanted to provide a tool like that. You can also create generosity maps for your own community to see how your community ranks relative to others. And providing the social information, we think, can help individuals actually be more intentional about their giving. So Generosity for Life was such a fun and exciting project because we got to bring the data to people who could actually use them. And in the process, it's been quite inspiring to see how so many different organizations and individuals have been able to use it in their own particular unique ways.
Wow, it's great.
I'm about to ask you a personal question. But before I do that, I've got to ask you a question I thought of as we've been talking. I thought of this, and I got to get your take on it. Do you measure? I don't know if the right term is secondary donation effect or trickle down effect. I'm thinking in terms of these large companies like an Amazon, like a Microsoft, Google. They quite often, almost all of them, will offer matching funds. Where an employee goes to an auction and maybe buys something, or maybe they make a donation annually, or whatever, and then the corporate matches that, and I'm calling that trickle down or secondary. Do you know any measures on that, and whether that's increasing or decreasing, or what's how do you wrap your arms around that? For example, a quick example locally here, where I happen to be up in the Northwest, just about every event where I go to, there's always Microsoft people in the audience, and they're always really good about raising their paddle and being very generous. And the nonprofits are very good about capturing the matching fund, if you will. And I'm thinking, well, that's part of it. But the other part of it is, if they weren't working for Microsoft in the first place, they wouldn't have the wealth that allowed them to make the donation. So it's sort of like a double win, right? They have the wealth to make the donation, and then once they make the donation, their company matches it. And so that's almost like a two-step benefit. So I was thinking about that as we were talking. Do you do any metrics on that?
Yes, so it's a very good point. With the Giving USA report, we capture those matching funds through the corporate giving arm, because most companies report the match side of it. So we get the employee, how much they give, and then the companies report on the matching. However, we've seen over time that companies have increased those matching funds. So many companies, even during the pandemic, raised how much they were matching. One local example here, Caterpillar, based in Illinois, instead of a 1-to-1 match, they do a 3-to-1 match.
Wow.
And yes, and then we saw that many companies now have what are called dollars for doers programs. So they don't just match your dollars that you give, your charitable contributions, but also your volunteer hours. And
Nice.
Nationally, yes. So I think that's a growing area for nonprofits to pay attention to. What we have learned through that research is that many employees are not actually requesting those matching dollars. And companies report that a large fraction, anywhere from 25 to almost 75% of the dollars they allocate for matching are being drawn down by employees. In other words, employees often have to fill out additional paperwork to secure those matching funds, and many employees are not going through that step.
They don't get around
So,
doing it.
yes. So what we encourage nonprofits to do as you're working with donors, especially when these are your board members or others who are in leadership roles, follow up with them. If your form should have the matching opportunities, but follow up and ask if they don't report a match, does your company offer a match? Because you're leaving dollars on the table. Companies are often very eager to provide those. It's become a very critical tool for many companies as far as engagement with employees and also retention in terms of keeping that talent. What we've also seen, yes.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. I know in our software we track whether an attendee at an event, for example, works for a company that has matching funds. So we encourage our clients to reach back out to them after the event and say, gee, thank you for coming. Thanks for spending what you did. Here's an extra receipt or whatever to submit through your HR department. So we try and encourage them, but you're right. I think a lot of it just goes on tap. So let's talk personal just a second. We talked a lot about your work. We've thrown a couple curveballs at you. What's something that you think our audience would be interested to know about you that could be somewhat of a surprise?
Yes,
Maybe it could be whatever.
a hobby. Well, I think I used to say I spend all my time working. I don't have as much time for hobbies, but I should also mention that I'm not just someone who's a researcher, but I've also been very committed to philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. So I sit on several boards, including our Central Indiana Community Foundation board, but I'm also a volunteer. And for several years, I have been a volunteer at the Juvenile Detention Center, just very close to our office here. And I often joke that it was harder to become a volunteer there than to get into college because there was so much paperwork required. And part of that is just to say for the nonprofit sector that sometimes we do have good reasons why we have good, very insurmountable barriers to volunteers and to donors, but we should also think about how do we make it easier for people to volunteer and sometimes to volunteer as a family because volunteering is something that you can do by yourself, but you can also do with your colleagues at work or with your family members. And encouraging nonprofits to start to think about how do we make it easier for people who want to be involved with this cause. And my experience as a volunteer sort of showed me it wasn't that easy to. It's one thing to raise your hand, but actually getting involved took a lot of work, a lot of dedication, and a lot of training, which all of those are important, but we shouldn't make it too difficult to give back.
Well, that's nice. You do quite a lot of different things, which we always like to finish our show by asking you one question. What is something that we didn't ask you that we wish we had?
You asked me a lot of questions, so it's hard to think of something you did not ask. But one thing I will emphasize that you didn't necessarily ask about is how generosity is such a big part of what it means to be American. And in our data, one very surprising and important finding is that generosity cuts across race and ethnicity. And we're used to thinking about having a lot of divisions in our society. But when it comes to giving, people are generous across all of those racial, ethnic divides, cultural divides that we're used to thinking. We find generosity in all the communities we study here in the United States, but also around the world. So I think that's such an important part of what it means to be American. And I just wanted to mention that because it's been such an important finding from our research.
Una, thank you for all of that. First of all, you're very refreshing. You're very positive.
Yay, happy to hear that.
It really is nice. And with that, we'll be right back after this message.
All right. Thank you.
We are a team that has had an enduring influence on the nonprofit industry for more than 3 decades. We pride ourselves on developing and delivering technology with a purpose, software born of a genuine understanding and passion for cause. We are relentlessly dedicated to our client success. We are with our clients for good. We are Arriva, tech with purpose, driven by cause. Arriva is the trusted advisor and market leader of fundraising, donor relationship management, and auction software and services. Exceed further, our evolutionary all-in-one digital fundraising and donor relationship management software is helping nonprofits worldwide further their mission, transform fundraising, and cultivate relationships with donors and constituents. Our Maestro Auction virtual, live, and silent auction software, text-to-bid, virtual and mobile bidding software, and text-to-fund, text-based donation software are helping nonprofits raise billions of dollars through thousands of virtual fundraising events, charity auctions, and galas. Visit Arriva.com and reach out today and see how Arriva can help your nonprofit organization go further.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's time for our Ask the Maestro segment where we answer questions submitted by our listeners. Jay, what question do you have for us today?
Well, David, we have a question from Beth, and she asks, I'm finding it difficult to acquire new donors, primarily millennials and Gen Xers. How do we engage the next generation of donors? And I think this is much better answered by Una than you and me. So, Una, it's all yours.
Yes, well, it's such a very timely question because when you look at the data, we have an aging population. Most organizations have older donors in their database, but not younger donors. And one phrase that I have found really helpful in thinking about how to reach younger donors is we have to meet those donors where they are. And that means developing, of course, customized strategies to meet those donors, engagement opportunities, sometimes volunteering opportunities, because volunteering can be an important way to build those relationships, but also thinking about just new approaches. What worked for older donors may not work for younger donors. In our research, we found that implementing a subscription-based model worked really well for younger donors. They're used to DoorDash, Amazon. Becoming a monthly donor was something that actually resonated with them. And then finally, as you think about stewarding those donors, thanking them, and even building relationships with them, it may look very different. In our community, United Way usually had a dinner, a banquet, and gave plaques to donors. While their Young Donor Society said they didn't want that. And the CEO at the time was quite surprised to hear that they didn't want a dinner, they didn't want a banquet, they didn't want the plaques. And she said, well, what can we do to honor and thank you for your giving? And they said, we'd like to arrange a bowling outing. And she said her team was quite surprised because they had never organized a bowling outing before, but it turned out to be quite fun. And she also noted that it cost less than some of the other things they had done before. So just being willing to try new things is a big piece of the success equation.
That is such great advice. Thank you. And I can't believe our time has sort of come to an end here. Beth, thank you so much for that great question. And if you have a question, anyone out there listening that you'd like us to tackle on Ask the Maestro, please submit it to us, and you just might hear your question responded to on another show.
Thank you for that, Jay. Una, it was such a pleasure having you on the show today. I mean, it was really great. I mean, you literally inspired me, and I love what we do here. I love the nonprofit industry, but to have that reinforcement about being here at a good time, because it's not easy. It's not easy for the nonprofits. It's creating awareness, reaching new donors, engaging donors, retention. Everybody is trying different ways, and you've given so many wonderful examples. You've given direction of even where to look for, more statistics and ideas. I just really want to thank you for all of that today.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
We also want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. And as always, we want to thank our fantastic sponsors, Ariba and Microsoft. Make sure you stay tuned for the next episode of Driven by Cause by hitting that subscribe button, and make it a great day. Thank you.